Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to USA versus China, the war you can't see by Johnny Harris, and this video was posted around 20 hours ago. Actually, it was 20 hours ago, so it's a very recent video, but by the time you're watching this reaction, it was probably posted like 2 days ago or so. But yeah, Johnny Harris, I've not reacted to him for a bit of time. I do react to him quite often, but it's been a good few weeks since I've watched one of his videos, and yeah, this is the sort of content I find interesting, and we're gonna see and learn about this. I guess this is to do with like digital and like the internet and all like cyber attacks and all that good stuff, you know. At least it doesn't involve people's lives, it just involves stealing people's data and all that stuff, I think. But yeah, we're gonna see what this is about, and yeah, if you want more reactions to his, let me know in the comments. Links are in the description to my Patreon as well if you want to see some even more reactions of mine, because a lot of content that I can't post to here, like movie reactions, YouTube reactions that I can't post for like age restriction purposes, series reactions that I'm reacting to for the first time, and all good things just there that you want to see my reactions to are in the description. True crime as well, which is stuff that I wish I could post here. It really is, because I love reactions to true crime. As you can tell, this channel, that on my YouTube channel, I have a lot of random reactions. I just react to anything. True crime would be a thing that would be on here a lot more, but sadly, it's just not. YouTube, I'm not in YouTube's good books, you know, so anything that I react to when it's related to that, age restricted or demonetized within a second. So yeah, that's where I post that stuff. So links are in the description for those interested. But let's jump into this and see the war we can't see. Hey, see what I've done there? I'm sorry.
The US and China are fighting a war. It's not a war that you can really see, and it's not a traditional battlefield war with soldiers, at least not yet. This is a war that's being fought in government offices and company boardrooms. It's a war that's being fought with rules and regulations, and it's meant to stop rivals from getting their hands on the most important technology in the world: microchips. You might hear them called semiconductors, microchips, or integrated circuits. These are all the same thing. We're just gonna call them chips, microchips, tiny pieces of metal that are magic and that run our world. This is a big thing that's happening in geopolitics right now. And I want to help you understand the stakes of this new conflict between the US and China. It's going to be the center of global attention.
I just clocked. Look how small my man's hands are. Bro. Wait, like hands to face. That is a weird. He's got baby hands. They are not his hands. Look, my hands are not that big. Like, nah, they're not that big. I mean, yeah, you can see compared to my face, they're not like, they sort of cover most of it, but my hands aren't actually that big. This man has tiny hands.
Between the US and China. It's going to be.
Look at his chubby little baby hands.
The center of global attention for years to come. And what we're seeing right now is how boring trade regulations and business rules can escalate to something that can impact your everyday life, because your life depends on chips, whether you know it or not. In fact, let me show you. Everything has silicon in it. Anything that has any technological smartness to it is a product of silicon.
How is silicon made?
Oh, and it's not just like the usual suspects techie things. Yep, microchip. My refrigerator, silicon. My microwave, silicon. Nah, I'm just playing with you. This doesn't have silicon in it.
So everything that we use,
this is just a few little things I found around the office, but like, silicon is in your refrigerator, your microwave, like it is in your digital clock. It is what makes our world go round. I mean, we are speaking through silicon right now. Like, you are watching this on the internet that is made possible because of silicon on a screen that is being fired by a silicon chip. Like, everything is silicon in our world. Besides like the forest or something, or like, you know, analog cameras.
But the drone has silicon.
So microchips make our economy possible, but it's not just tech. It's not just a consumer tech. It's also military. The military needs microchips. They need microchips for weapon systems. They need microchips for intelligence. They need microchips for AI. They need microchips to stay ahead of their rivals. Microchips represent geopolitical power because they represent military power. That's something to just keep in mind as we go through this story.
House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan tonight. China is already responding.
Lead the world in future industries, protect our national security.
We're in the middle of one of the most fundamental changes in the character of war in the history of mankind.
Hey, pause. I feel really strongly that the internet is a place where you can learn to level up your professional skills. I learned all my skills on the internet. That is how I know.
I saw him in the description. What's the ad for this time? Thanks so much. Be sure to visit Scalar Johnny Harris to take free classes. Okay, so I'm shouting this out because this is a video that's just been posted. So this ad is still in place. So I guess it's like a place for like classes and stuff.
This industry, they give you referrals. It really is just like a one-stop shop if you want to level up as a software professional.
Well, there you go. So you're learning to do things, pretty much software related stuff. I don't do this usually because usually I react to his old videos, but because this ad is still in place, I'm trying to like show him the support. If you're interested in learning all good stuff to do whatever like he's mentioned or that it shows, links are in the description to that, so you can show him some support, because these videos quite often do get demonetized, as I can tell, because when I react to them sometimes they do, which obviously means his do as well. But yeah, links are there for those who want to support him.
In 1959, the US was about to get very lucky. Computers at the time were becoming a thing, but they kind of looked like this. Tons of wires connecting everything, all of them sending little precise electronic signals to each other to solve tedious, complex math problems. It was clunky, it was inefficient, it wasn't very special yet. But then two American engineers that were working separately at two totally different companies had a very similar idea. And the idea was to get rid of this, all these wires. There was this new technology that had cropped up called a transistor. It was like a really precise, reliable on and off switch. It allows you to control pulses of electricity super precisely. But at first, transistors looked like this. They were big and clunky, lots of parts. So the idea was, what if we start carving these little on and off switches onto a material called silicon? It's like a super abundant metal-like material inside of Earth's crust. But it's actually a horrible conductor of electricity. If you mix silicon with other elements, it conducts electricity really well. It is a semiconductor of electricity. Exactly what they needed to precisely control the flow of electricity very accurately. No more clunky long wires. Let's just carve our little transistor switches onto this silicon chip, a single circuit. That way we can fit a lot more into one place, all close together. So that's what they did. And then the world changed forever.
With the transistor, man has gone far toward matching some of the capacity of the human brain.
Okay, real quick aside here. We're gonna get to the geopolitics and stuff, but I was so curious about one thing. Why does being able to precisely control the on and off switch, or like the flow of electricity, do anything to change the world? Well, it turns out, this is where my mind bends a little bit. Just stick with me here. So transistors can turn on and off, and they send a signal that results in one of two things, a 1 or a 0 when it gets to the other side. Super boring and useless if you just have one little transistor sending a 1 or a 0. But if you have 1,000 of these switches, all sending little signals in the right order, suddenly you have something that kind of resembles a little brain, firing signals in a coordinated system that can actually solve logical mathematical problems and literally remember things.
But this is binary, isn't it? I remember doing this sort of stuff in computer science, and I failed computer science. I hated it. But I know this is like binary code or whatever, and I remember like this sort of stuff, add and all this sort of stuff as well.
This is kind of how our brain works. It's pulses, lots of pulses. And now we're talking about computing. This is how computers work.
Yep.
The more pulses of electricity you can...
Wait, so this is how did they even plan, like, when they built computers, how did they just know that it was going to be problem solving and stuff, like 0 and 1 and all this sort of stuff? How did they just know this is, like, was it an accident that they made it 0 and 1, or did they just know? Like, I don't understand how this was even a thought in their mind to just make this all work. I don't know, it's just weird to me, man. This is why I failed computer science. I just don't get it.
the first light.
The more pulses of electricity you can control, the more you can do with technology. And suddenly, there's a new gold rush in the United States. But the gold is now silicon, and the rush is to put as many of these little switches onto that silicon chip as possible so that we can make our technology do more and more sophisticated stuff. And now people have smarter clocks and TVs and radios and video games and calculators. Things that you can hold in your hand and press a bunch of buttons, and suddenly the silicon chip is solving math problems for you instantaneously. What is happening? This is magic. Oh, and it's not just tech bros in the 60s who are loving this. The US military and NASA are first in line to get their hands on these new chips. They dream of using them for more sophisticated weapons or going to the moon. Chips were becoming a currency for national power. We gotta protect them, thinks the USA. Luckily, the USA didn't really have to do much to protect them at first. They were killing it. They were the global leaders of this chip making stuff. Every year, US companies crammed more and more transistors onto this little piece of silicon. More calculations per second. More and more companies are now cropping up to make dreams come true with their new magical micro.
Is that why it's called Silicon Valley then? Because all the stuff made there is from silicon. I'm sorry I'm pausing. I'm going to stop soon. But why is it called Silicon Valley? This is what I do on my channel. I'm sorry, but I got to do it. Wait, why is Silicon Valley called Silicon Valley? There we go. Originally derived from the region's large number of silicon chip manufacturers. Well, there we go. So it wasn't such a stupid search after all. Who's the real winner here? I don't know what I'm talking about.
Chips. Lots of this action was happening right here in Central California, in a valley that would soon take on the name
For God's sake, 2 seconds before.
of the material that enabled all this magic to happen. By the
God
mid-1980s, they were carving nearly 300,000 little on and off switches onto a piece of silicon. Oh, and look, it's Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Yes!
They're using these more sophisticated silicon chips to change the course of history. Home computing, color televisions, more advanced satellites, and smaller electronic devices of all kinds. There's a revolution happening. And over the next 30 years, the number of transistors that they can fit onto a piece of silicon starts to become ridiculous. And it's like the 90s, and these things are getting faster and smaller, and now humans have computers in their homes that are more advanced than the ones that were used to land on the moon.
Not only do they play the typical computer games that all the kids enjoy, but their curiosity for learning has skyrocketed.
And look, it's even smaller now. It fits in your pocket.
And we are calling it iPhone.
None of this is possible
Oh, it's so sore.
without these little magical brains made of silicon. Okay, but then a problem arises, and it has to do with these. These look like just factories where they make microchips, right? No, these are not just factories. We have a special name for these. They're called fabs, and they are a central part of this story. Because listen, cramming tens of millions of transistors onto a piece of metal-like substance from the Earth is hard to begin with. But as the number of transistors continues to double and double and double, making them becomes incredibly complicated. I mean, look at these operations. This is inside of a fab, and the reason why it looks like they're doing open heart surgery here is because even a single speck of dust that gets into this fab and onto one of these chips can totally ruin it. So yeah, it was American companies who are designing and making chips, but every year they have to spend more and more on these tedious fabs, these factories on steroids. They're getting really spendy, like billions of dollars spendy. Meanwhile, an ocean away, you've got a couple of economic miracles happening in all of these countries in East Asia that are rapidly developing. And they want in on this microchip gold rush. One of these countries is Japan, where a bunch of new tech companies were getting really good at making chips. And they could make them and sell them for way cheaper than the US. Oh, and by the way, this was with the help of the Japanese government who's like subsidizing this. Governments love microchips. That's going to be a theme in this video. So the US is hating this. They're kind of freaking out that Japan is getting in on all the chip gold rush. They got to do something about it. So it's 1987 and the US government basically says, no more Japanese chips. They put a 100% tax on Japanese chips coming into the US.
I guess did Japan just sell it to other countries then, or do they just keep them for themselves?
Which, not surprisingly, just crushes Japan's chip industry. Too bad, so sad, Japan, said the president at the time, who was, wait, what the hell? Ronald Reagan? The prophet of free markets and free trade? What's going on here?
Our aim is to increase our national wealth so all will have more.
Well, turns out that chips are really important. So important, in fact, that Mr. Free Market Economics abandoned his principles to protect American chips. This is a theme. We're gonna see a lot more of it. Okay, so let's move on. Meanwhile, another Asian economic miracle country is growing super fast and wants to get in on this. But they also are looking over at Japan and they're like, we don't want the US to squash us for trying to compete with them. So if we can't beat them, let's join them. Oh, and this is a really important foreshadow here. Taiwan is looking over here at their neighbor China, who's also getting really rich and more serious about making good on their lifelong promise to eventually invade Taiwan and, quote, reunite it with China. Kind of scary. So in the back of Taiwan's mind, they're also kind of looking for a way to get the West to protect them. So they made a bet. A freaking brilliant bet that solved all their problems at once. At the time, a bunch of engineers in Taiwan were actually leaving Taiwan to go to the US, to go to university there, and then to actually work for US companies in the cutting-edge microchip economy. Texas Instruments, Intel. So the first thing the Taiwanese government does is lure them back. They guarantee them jobs, they pay for their travel costs, they give them tax breaks to create companies. Their goal is to create a Silicon Valley in Taiwan, and it totally works. It's like a reverse brain drain. Thousands of engineers return to Taiwan to start companies and to help build the microchip industry in Taiwan. And one of those engineers is the one who actually changed the game. It's this guy named Morris Chang. He had the best idea of all of them. He had seen that American chip makers were hating how much money they had to invest in these fabs, these really complicated factories to make microchips. His idea was, instead of trying to compete with the United States in the chip industry and get crushed like Japan did, let's become their friend. Let's solve their problem. We won't design chips, we won't make devices, we won't make the software, we will just make the chips themselves. We will become the masters of fabs, the tedious, expensive job of getting more and more transistors onto a piece of silicon. So he starts a company called Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. Super promising and creative name, Morris. And the government of Taiwan is super into it, because now they can get in on the chip gold rush, and instead of pissing off the United States, they actually will solve the US's problem, and crucially, make the US reliant on them. So now they have protection, a silicon shield to protect them from their big aggressive neighbor. The government gave nearly half of the startup costs to Morris Chang to start this new venture. They connected him to venture capital, and according to Chang himself, the Prime Minister of Taiwan even called a super rich Taiwanese investor to force him to invest in TSMC.
Fucking hell.
Whoa. Okay, yeah, wow. Like, you can see just how vital chips are. A little piece of silicon with a bunch of on and off switches.
Madness.
TSMC was basically a state-owned company from the beginning. So yeah, Taiwan's now in the game, and semiconductors are now becoming a geopolitical bargaining chip. A geopolitical bargaining chip. I kind of regret it.
Fuck's sake.
Sorry.
Go in here, and I'm
I believe I'm going to be the nominee.
So it's like the early 2000s, and semiconductors are now squarely a part of geopolitics. But meanwhile, in business world, in Silicon Valley, they are loving this Taiwan situation. Because now, instead of having to do all of this expensive, tedious fab stuff, they can just do the design and the software and the business side of it, and they can just ship it off to TSMC, and they do the rest, taking on the expensive, tedious work of maintaining their fabs and keeping them up to the cutting edge, which requires billions of dollars every year. Like, to keep some perspective, look at this graph. This is the number of transistors on a piece of silicon. By 2010, they're now getting 1 billion transistors onto a piece of silicon the size of your fingernail. And the only way to do
What the fuck? How is this possible? What the hell?
that is to make each one of these insanely small. So let's just take a moment to blow our own minds here. Each transistor is becoming smaller than a width of a human hair. Wait, no, sorry, that's actually way too big of a scale. A human hair is like 90,000 nanometers thick. We need to go smaller, like a red blood cell. Wait, no, that's still too big.
Oh my god. What the what?
7,000 nanometers. Okay, a virus, something that's not even totally alive. It's so small. Wait, that's 14 nanometers. Still too big. I mean, we are getting into insane scales here. IBM recently revealed a chip with transistors that are 2 nanometers thick, making them literally smaller than a strand of DNA. So
What? How? and they're just continually making it smaller still.
In these fabs, the reason it looks like this is because they have to figure out how to do this and to keep doing it and keep making it smaller and smaller, providing the world with the most advanced chips. And this is why we have nice things. Your entire world revolves around what is happening on these little strips of silicon. More and more US chip companies don't actually have fabs. They design them, they do all the software and the machinery and the selling and the business, but the actual making of the chip happen in Taiwan. But as 92% of all advanced chips are now made in Taiwan,
who would have thought Taiwan was so important in terms of running the world?
What this means is that the US is completely reliant.
And what happens if China do what they're wanting to do and try and take control? Then I can see why now the US would get involved for other reasons too, but I can see another reason why they would want to get involved.
On TSMC, basically. And finally, we're getting to the conflict. This is where China becomes really important. Because China, the most populous country, is suddenly very rich, and they want new tech too. So they become actually a giant customer of all these chips, buying 40% of all the chips in the world, meaning that they are now reliant on the US, who is reliant on Taiwan, to design and make their chips. So let's look at the modern chip industry as it all comes together, which is going to set the stage for how this conflict is playing out today. Here's a very simplified version of the supply chain. Again, very simplified. It's just insane. I'm not going to go into the full thing. The US is the one that manufactures the machines, the software, and the designs. Japan makes metals and chemicals for chips. The Netherlands makes this crazy UV laser.
The Netherlands, just out of the completely miles and miles away.
Machine that is used to carve the chips. And Taiwan, crucially, does the expensive, tedious job of actually making the chip. Almost all of the most advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And then you have China, who is the giant customer in all of this. They're the ones who are buying more and more chips to grow their economy. I mean, look at this beautiful supply chain. You've got a bunch of countries that are involved now. Everyone has a part to play, and everyone depends on each other for chips. Globalization is great. Economic interdependence is a recipe for peace and mutual prosperity. Right? I mean, it used to be. But there's something else happening with the supply chain that might be hard to see in this diagram, which is that the US is still the kingpin of this system. They're the most important player. They have the most important ingredients, the best designs, the best software, and the most machines to make chips. Taiwan, their bestie, has the second most important ingredients in all of this, the fabs that actually make the chips. China, on the other hand, is in a position of weakness. Their role is basically the big hungry chip consumer, totally reliant on their frenemy, the United States, and their annoying neighbor, Taiwan, who they want to invade, but now they're reliant on for cutting-edge chips. And what's at stake here for China? Well, it's not just their economy. They don't want chips just so they can have a bunch of cool tech. They want it because more and more, they need advanced chips for their military. It's like the 2010s, China's military is getting kind of scary, but it's not that scary, says the US. We're not that worried. We'll always be ahead of China when it comes to controlling the supply chain, and our military gets first dibs on all the best chips. China has no chance of catching up ever. And this is true. China was truly behind. They did not have the tech and the designs and the companies and the ability to make advanced chips. They were reliant on the United States. If China pissed off the US, they could just take away their chips. And now, we have a rising conflict on our hands. China, this big superpower, is not going to let this happen. They realize that they have to do two things. Number one, they have to start making their own chips. They want to break free and stop relying on the US for anything, make their own chips so that the US doesn't have leverage over them. And number two, and deeply related, is they want to continue to build up their military, to modernize it, to build more warships and satellites and high-tech missiles and drones, and eventually AI. All of this needs advanced chips, which they don't have. So they're like, we are gonna make them on their own. And the US is like, good luck, China. You're so far behind. Good luck trying to figure out how to do this thing that we've spent the past 60 years figuring out how to do, make really expensive chips. Experts in software and machinery and fabs, like, you have no chance. So how is China gonna catch up? Lucky for them, in China, there's a blurry line between businesses and the military. It's all kind of overseen by the state. And also lucky for them, there are loads of US tech companies that are addicted to making money by selling microchip technology to China. So instead of invent it themselves, they see an opportunity here. Need software and equipment for your new chip industry? Get it from the US. Need fancy chip designs and software? US companies have you covered. Need those high-tech chips produced for your military projects? American companies will sell them to you. And yes, TSMC in Taiwan will make them for you. Wait, China's using US technology to get ahead of US technology? What? In 2021, the Washington Post reported that China was building super advanced laboratories to test scary new weapons, including nukes. And guess what? They were using American semiconductor tech to do this. It started to become clear that American companies were selling tech and chips and software to Chinese tech companies that were actually just a front for the military. Wow. Yikes. The US chip industry is now allowing China to get ahead. This was starting to happen, but I think what really woke up the US is when this happened.
Huge step forward in China's military. China conducted 2 tests of a hypersonic missile system, technology that would allow it to fire a nuclear warhead faster than anyone else.
The U.S. does not currently have the ability to even track this weapon, much less defeat it.
US military generals wake up one morning to discover that China has just tested a new weapon. A missile that flew around the entire world, going 5 times the speed of sound.
What the fuck?
A mile a second. Oh, and it's really hard to see because it flies below radar range. It's super nimble, maneuverable, and has the ability to carry nukes. The US had been working on something similar, but China beat them to it by years. And it was American microchip technology that helped them build it.
Mad. Checkmate. Fair enough. They stole it and now they've perfected it, or not perfected it, but they've managed to build something quicker, which doesn't usually happen, as you can tell by the Cold War, for example. Stuff like that doesn't usually happen.
Yikes. This totally caught them off guard.
Says that US intelligence services had no idea that China was so far ahead.
It turns out that while the US government thought that they were running faster and that they were fine, they were actually fueling the rise of their biggest rival by giving them the technology that they need to get ahead. So the US decides that they've got to do something. China is ahead on these missiles, and they might get ahead on things like AI, and they're doing it with our tech. No more free trade, no more free markets. The government is jumping back into the chip game to sort this out.
Fundamental change is taking place today, politically, economically, and technologically.
All right, Joe Biden's like rolling up his sleeves. He's like, what do we do here?
Well, I'm surprised he managed to form the sentence together.
Step 1, cut them off. No more chips for China.
The Biden administration published a large set of export controls on Friday in order to slow Beijing's technological and military advances.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
And here we are back in the fun bureaucratic paperwork. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security.
God's sake. Where's replying to something? How long is it? All right, where were we?
Security docket number 220930-0204 RIN 0674. Certain advanced computing and semiconductor manufacturing items, supercomputers, and semiconductor end use entity list modification. I'm not gonna go through this. This is just a bunch of rules that says no more chips to China. All those cutting-edge chips that China was buying from US companies, blocked.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
Manufacturing equipment they need to make their own chips, blocked. All that.
But surely they've got all the stuff they need now. Like, they've got everything they need, so now they're just going to build it from their own anyway. Surely it's like too late at a certain point.
US made vital software that Chinese companies need to design their own chips, block, block, block.
We will bring these jobs back to our shores and end our dependence on foreign chips.
In fact, the Biden administration went super far to say that any company globally that uses US tech to produce chips is now blocked from doing business with Chinese firms.
To cut China off from certain semiconductor chips made anywhere in the world with US equipment.
Why stop there? Americans are now forbidden from working for Chinese chip companies. This is huge news. Like, this is huge news. This is happening. This is like, we're in the middle of this right now. But let's go back to that visual of...
So this is all going to probably cause a lot of problems in China's side. So maybe we'll see something happen soon. Oh no. not Russia, Ukraine 2.0.
The whole supply chain. If you cut off this, then yeah, you hurt China, but you also hurt the other side of this line, US chip makers. Like one example, this US chip maker, NVIDIA. They went from selling tons of chips to China to suddenly being banned from doing so. This has led to a $400 million loss in revenue in just 1 quarter. Poof, up in smoke. One of the biggest chip makers now totally cut off from their big customer because Joe Biden is afraid of the Chinese military, and for good reason, which leads to step 2 of this policy. The Biden administration wasn't going to leave these tech companies out dry, so they gave billions of dollars to American chip makers to say, hey, yeah, sorry we cut you off from your main customer because we're kind of getting scared of their military, but we have to protect our chips. Here's a bunch of money. Congress passed the CHIPS Act, which gives billions of dollars to these companies to create fabs back in the United States.
This time it wasn't Russia, but China, another rival power, would get way ahead of us if we didn't pull out all the stops. And this legislation is the first large step in pulling out all of those stops.
Government wants the fabs to come home to ensure that this most valuable technology isn't solely reliant on outside countries. And we're talking giant payouts. 50 billion taxpayer dollars go to companies like Intel, which is now opening a new fab in Ohio.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world right here in Ohio.
Or even TSMC themselves, which is based in Taiwan, but is now opening a new fab in Arizona.
Fair enough.
Keep it in the family. Okay, so this is economic war, and the Biden administration just did a huge move. Reminder that the reason why this is important is because it's not just about like business or even missiles. This is about chips. Chips are not just chips. Chips are the future. Chips are power. Yes, chips mean economic growth and new cool technology, but chips also mean new weapons. Chips are the currency of geopolitical power. Kind of like what oil used to be, but now it's freaking silicon with a bunch of on and off switches on it. The US is taking control of its valuable resource and cutting China off. So the US makes this big move, cuts China off, and that, this is geopolitical conflict. They just made the move. The ball's in China's court now. How will they respond? And this is where Taiwan comes back into the picture. Taiwan, this small country that finds itself in the crossfires of this conflict. 92% of all advanced chips are made here, mostly by TSMC. The US is totally reliant on them. A few months before the Biden administration was doing all of this, making it illegal to sell chips to China, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Not just to shake hands with political leaders, no. She was there to visit TSMC, the chip fab. What Pelosi was really doing here was signaling to Taiwan that they are vital to American security. The US relies on this, and will protect it.
Came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
And in doing so, she shows us what China's countermove might be in all of this. It might be Taiwan.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes, that's the commitment we made.
Oh God. Oh no. Fucking hell, not China and the US.
Okay, but wait, what this doesn't mean is China's going to invade Taiwan and take all the chips or take over the fab or something. That scenario doesn't make any sense. If China invaded Taiwan, all they would find is a bunch of empty fabs if they weren't bombed already. They wouldn't know how to operate them. They wouldn't have all of the engineers and the software and all of the supply chain stuff that they would need to actually make chips. They would likely be fighting a war, and the US would probably get involved. I made a whole video about it. You can go check it out. Anyway, the effective countermove here for China would be to operate right on the edge of active warfare, to strike back at the US without provoking a military response. This is how big nuclear powers do it. They don't actually clash. They want to just sort of poke at each other. One scenario would be China sending a bunch of its Navy ships to set up in the ocean right around here, creating a kind of partial blockade. They could stop cargo ships that are coming to and from the island, kind of just slowing everything down, but really holding the silicon hostage, making it hard for the supply chain to actually work. I mean, just remember the COVID-19 chip shortage or supply chain shortage, or even the Suez Canal blockage from a couple years ago. Imagine those supply chain issues, but on steroids, totally debilitating and being used for a hostile purpose to strike back at the US. Like Biden forbidding American companies to sell chips to China, the blockade would be a way to strike at your nuclear-armed rival without going too far, without risking too much escalation or a miscalculation.
It's incumbent upon us to stay number one.
To lead the world in future industries and protect our national security.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world.
That's where we're at. We're in the middle of another economic war between big nuclear powers. We don't know what happens next, but one thing that feels clear to me is that Cold War vibes are back as these two great powers with different ideologies about the world compete with each other. This fight over chips will continue. And this idea in international relations that I kind of took for granted, which is that like globalization and interdependence is good and will lead to less conflict, it's being seriously challenged. Economic interdependence is being used as a weapon. That's what we're seeing here. And not just here. I made a video a couple months ago about how Vladimir Putin is cutting off natural gas to Europe. Frankly, it's not that much different than Joe Biden cutting off microchips to China. I mean, it is different in a lot of ways, blah, 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 we get it. But like the big mechanics of how this conflict is playing out is peculiar and is becoming a part of how conflict looks today. So even as this old school style war continues to rage in Ukraine, we're seeing an evolution of how conflict works in our world. Where once a lot of conflict revolved around natural resources like oil most recently, the currency of power, we've moved to an era where a magical piece of metal-like substance called silicon, pulsing ones and zeros, is kind of the new oil, the new currency of power, the new thing that we should protect to protect our military supremacy. So in a big shift of the trend of globalization, countries are now turning inward to protect their stuff, leading to a new era of distrust, severed connection, and rising tensions. Okay.
Flipping hell, man.
Okay. Semiconductors is over. That's it. I'm now going to eat a Reese's peanut butter cup from Trader Joe's.
Fair enough. Yeah. This surprised me. I thought this was gonna be more digital, and it kind of does relate to digital in a way, but this was microchips, chips, whatever it is. God damn. That is absolutely mental. Hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. Hopefully it didn't scare you too much. Hopefully we're all gonna still be here in 5 years' time and it doesn't lead to a major war. Oh, but yeah, the war you can't see. This was an interesting reaction, and yeah, until next time.